now. White House advisors are quietly recalibrating the administration's approach on immigration after multiple polls show Americans souring on his handling of the issue. That's according to new reporting from Axios. The outlet reports that private GOP polling, recently reviewed by Trump's team, showed support for his immigration policies are falling, adding that the results, mirroring recent public surveys, has raised real concern about the administration's confrontational enforcement tactics. Axios writes this: the internal GOP polling that alarmed some Trump insiders was completed at the end of December, days before an ICE agent fatally shot Renee Good in Minneapolis. The poll found that 60% of independent voters and 58% of undecided voters said Trump was too focused on deporting undocumented migrants. And a third survey said Trump was primarily deporting law-abiding people as opposed to criminals. Matt Lewis, this brings us to you and your recent Substack titled "Trump is Tanking More Than His Poll Numbers." And I'll say, Matt, certainly some Republicans have quietly whispered that they are concerned about these immigration tactics and how that won't help come midterms. But nothing I've seen from the president and his true inner circle suggests they're going to be changing tack anytime soon.
Yeah, look, I think it comes down to how cynical are you about what Donald Trump is up to here. If he is trying to provoke violence intentionally so that he can bring in the military, so he can shut down elections, well, I guess everything's going according to schedule. If he is more of a conventional politician that actually cares about publicity, but also cares about public support, and if the midterms matter, and if 2028 matters, I think this is a huge mistake. And we're seeing it already in the poll numbers. It's not smart politics. Look, I think Donald Trump, during an election, he always manages to succeed by occupying our attention. He wins the attention economy, and he changes the subject, say, from, a sex scandal to something else outrageous, to talking about race, and it tends to work. But I don't know if governing works that way. If going from one piece of bad news to another piece of bad news to another controversy to another scandal, if that actually works, I don't think it's going to work for Republicans in the midterms, assuming a free and fair election. And look, I'll say this too. It's not just politics. I think this has an effect on just law enforcement in general, the way the public is going to perceive law enforcement, not just ICE. And so these are long-term ramifications.
Yeah, Ali, the part of the polling that we showed earlier that stuck out to me is that seemingly a significant majority of Americans say that they feel less safe because ICE is being operated and deployed in this way by this administration. And so the pressure points on the Hill right now, in D.C. where you are, what are you hearing in terms of how responsive they are to just that notion, that it's not just, okay, wait, maybe you hate all the brown people, but now you yourself maybe aren't feeling as secure?
The polling, though, has shown that this was a growing liability for Republicans for months now, because people were questioning. This is not the first moment that we've seen masked agents pulling people out of cars or doing enforcement operations. Certainly, it is one of the most scary moments that we've seen. But other communities have faced this. And so, by and large, my conversations with Republicans on the Hill, they've been very aware of the fact that this could be a liability that they have to defend going into a midterm election year where they're already playing defense on kitchen table issues like affordability, cost of groceries, other things like that. So this is just part of the issue set. I will say lawmakers on Capitol Hill are going to have an opportunity, if they actually have tangible concerns about ICE, to voice them when the Department of Homeland Security appropriations funding bill comes up. This is probably the most complex piece of appropriations legislation that they are doing right now. I've spoken to dozens of Democrats who say there's no way that they can get on board supporting what's in there right now, increased funding for ICE, continuing to fund ICE against this backdrop. It's a no-starter for so many Democrats. And yet we're watching Republicans try to come to some consensus. Maybe there's things that they can put in there around body cameras and others, Rev, that get Democrats on board. Ultimately, if Republicans have reservations, there's one of their ways to voice it. But I think you and I were just having a really fascinating conversation about the last time that Minneapolis was in the spotlight during a period of unrest, and it was during George Floyd. And we were going back and forth about the ways that this is both different and the same from the last time Trump faced this problem. I wonder how you see it, if you can bring viewers inside your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that there are similarities because, as you said, and as we were talking, he did talk about bringing out the National Guard, and he in fact said that when the shooting starts, the looting starts, the shooting starts.
Yeah.
But he also talked on the phone to George Floyd's family and tried to act like he had a human kind of feeling. Whereas in this case, he's talking about investigating the partner of the deceased. And they've already, in advance of any investigation, said this was self-defense. So it is a real stark difference in how they're dealing with this and how they dealt with George Floyd, but in the same rhetoric, because one will never forget him going in front of that church holding up the Bible and lecturing protesters. But at the same time, he did show some sensitivity to the family. The hostility they're showing the family here. I mean, this lady was bringing a 6-year-old to school and leaving the school, and they call her without any, not even 2 hours later, a terrorist. It's unreal, unbelievable, but it also is a reason why we need to really mobilize in this country.
And we'll certainly be watching whether the president follows through or not on his threat to invoke the Insurrection Act there in Minnesota. So, Elizabeth, you a moment ago mentioned your recent trip to Europe, and you're writing for The Times about the reaction there to President Trump's efforts to seize Greenland from Denmark. It's a piece titled "Bleak Times in Copenhagen. Danes Feel Betrayed and Bewildered by Trump." Please tell us more.
Well, I was there because Denmark is one of the most pro-American countries in Europe. If you talk to Danes, they love America. It's been a long alliance. They're part of NATO, of course. But I went over there, and they do not understand what is happening. One of the most poignant conversations I had was with a Danish soldier who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan alongside Americans. He was in a unit in Afghanistan in 2009. Danes in his unit died. He was in Helmand province, which was one of the most dangerous parts of Afghanistan at the time. And he said, I don't know what's happening. This is like a punch to the gut. He said, you know, we've always done everything the Danes asked. We sent soldiers, we sent planes. We never said no. And now this, he said, it's like it hurts. And, you know, I heard that all over Denmark. They just this bewilderment. We thought we were a good ally. They all remembered how last year Vice President J.D. Vance called them a bad ally, because, as Trump is now saying, that they only had 2 dog sleds to defend Greenland, which is a Danish territory. So it was a pretty eye-opening trip. And again, there's just this sense of a feeling of betrayal and abandonment and bewilderment. And they're insisting we're not selling Greenland. We can't sell Greenland.
Yeah, they've said that over and over and over. And Matt Lewis, you know, this is a moment where some Republicans have perhaps suggested they would stand up to President Trump, that they recognize that moving in on Greenland, whether it's just coercion or actually military force, potentially could shatter the NATO alliance. It's just remarkable to me that the GOP, which is, you know, cold warriors, NATO, staunch NATO supporters, that here we are now, and even if they're the fig leaf of national security over this quest to take Greenland, when really an argument can be made very strongly that this would make us far less safe.
Absolutely. And this, to me, is consistent with the last story and with just the theme of Donald Trump. And it's that, you know, you work hard to build a reputation and to build a brand. And America had a brand. You know, these institutions matter. Respect for law enforcement matters, right? And that is being eroded if they look like jackbooted thugs. And I think America had cultivated this sense that we had a sort of moral authority, and we weren't perfect, but that we were the last best hope, and that we cared about the free world. You know, we were a beacon of hope. All of this stuff that Ronald Reagan, I think, worked assiduously to cultivate. We're told that even people in the gulags knew about this message and this hope. And Donald Trump is eroding that from even our friends. And there will be consequences. And these consequences will last longer than Donald Trump, sadly.
Yeah, I think there is I heard from a prominent Democrat in the last few days, bewildered, yes, and just simply saying, like, well, to the rest of the world, we look like the bad guys now. Author and columnist Matt Lewis, thank you so much for joining us this morning. MS Now senior Capitol Hill reporter Ali Vitale, thank you as well.